And helping us to pivot to the future, Reverend K. Palmer-Marsh is going to introduce us to three of the newest elected bishops throughout our denomination. And I will turn to her. Bishop, we are grateful for all of these three bishops. Kay has retired pastor and on the steering committee of UMARC.
In the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Today, we have the privilege to hear from the three new United Methodist bishops in the Western jurisdiction. They were elected on November 4th, 2022 at Christ United Methodist Church in Salt Lake City. They have been bishops for approximately 14 days. These new bishops are coming aboard as our denomination deals with continuing fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and rising congregational disaffiliations. It is a challenging time, but I look at it as a very exciting time, and especially as I see the hope that these three new bishops offer the leadership of our church here in our United Methodist movement. Here's a brief introduction of the new bishops. First, Bishop Dottie Escobedo Frank is our jurisdiction's third Hispanic bishop. She's an elder in the district, Desert Southwest Conference, and has served as district superintendent. We all welcome her as bishop in our United Methodist Church. Bishop Escobedo Frank has been assigned to the California Pacific Conference. Secondly, we have Bishop Carlo Rapanut, the first Filipino-American bishop in the United Methodist Church, and the first U.S. bishop who was ordained in a central conference, a region outside of the United States. He served as district superintendent of the Alaska Conference and was assistant to the bishop. We all welcome him as bishop in our United Methodist Church. Bishop Rapanut has been assigned to the Desert Southwest Conference. And lastly here, number three, Bishop Cedrick Bridgeforth is the first openly gay African-American bishop in the United Methodist Church. He has served as district superintendent in the California Pacific Conference. We all welcome him as bishop in our United Methodist Church. Bishop Bridgeforth has been assigned to the Oregon, Idaho, Pacific Northwest, and the Alaska conferences. So we will start today with Bishop Escobedo Frank, then Bishop Rapanut, and then Bishop Bridgeforth. Bishops.
So good morning, everyone. I've been thinking a lot about this wonderful conference, and thank you for those of you who have put it together. I thought about my background. My dad was first generation Mexican who went back and forth across the border. And later on in his ministry, he met my mom, became a Christian, and wanted to go back to Mexico. So we moved to Nogales, Arizona in Mexico, the border town. And he started taking clothes and food over to the people of Mexico because they were hungry and cold. And so they asked him questions about why he was doing it. And so his first pew was an electrical pole that was sitting on the ground, and people sat there, and he told them why he was bringing clothes and food. And then they invited him to come inside because it was getting cold. So someone brought him into their house to tell the gospel story or why he was doing what he was doing. But my dad's a tall man, and the ceiling was really short. It was a wood floor, cardboard walls, tin roof. And so he was always like kind of bending down as he'd stand up and talk to them. And so one time, a couple of weeks later, he came in and they had dug a hole in their floor so that he could stand in the hole and stand upright and be able to preach to the people in the room. I say all that because it's sometimes the little innovations that really change our world. And his congregation grew, and he started 30 churches in Mexico, Lutheran churches. And so that's a history, a little bit of the history of where I grew up and the stories that I lived as part of my young years. But I would like to say too, at this time, that we really are at a period where we need to make major transformation. We can't wait. We have to just go ahead and do it. We are at a great time in this moment where post-COVID, people are expecting things to be different. So that is to our benefit. But a while back, I was studying about edge dwellers and heretics in the change process. So in my mind, the change process happens from the edge and comes into the center, and then the center becomes the tradition or the orthodoxy, and then you have to, in order to make change, go to the edge again and bring the edge in order for change to happen. That's a continual process. So one of the persons I love to listen to is Seth Godin. He's a leadership guru, and he said, heretics are the new leaders, the ones who challenge the status quo, who get out in front of their tribes, who create movements. The marketplace now rewards and embraces the heretics. Suddenly, heretics, troublemakers, and change agents aren't merely thorns in our side, they are keys to our success. And I don't know if you've noticed, but like we've been called heretics recently. But I'd like us to remember that there's a cemetery in London called Bunhill Fields, and it's a place where they threw the bones of the people that died in the plague. And then later, it became the burial ground for the nonconformists, the people that were heretics of their day. So in that burial ground, for example, is buried John Bunyan, George Fox, and Susanna Wesley. And so some of our heritage were considered heretics in their day. So I think that what happens is that in this period of time, that we have to pay attention to the edges, what's happening on the edge of our society, what's happening on the edge of our communities, our church communities, who's out there kind of hanging out and looking in, but not yet in. Before I was elected, I was talking to different groups, and I was talking to Marcha West, the youth of Marcha West. And I just made this side comment, if I get it, I want you to come and greet me. Well, they interpreted that, if you get it, we're going to come on stage with you. And they did. When my name was announced, they came on stage and they had said to me as they were coming, we've never been on stage like this before. We've never been centered before. And you being there makes us feel more centered. I came back to the Desert Southwest Conference. It's hard to believe it's only been 14 days, I think you said. It feels like a lifetime so far. And I met with the Hispanic Latinos in my conference who were having a retreat that I was going to attend fully, but I just popped in to say hello. When I popped in, they greeted me with joy. They wrapped their loving arms around me. They were just so excited. And we started talking about what it means to have a Latina in this place. And they were saying that we just don't feel like we've been able to access those spaces. And we talked about how in our world, Hispanic Latino world, in the Methodist world, we are often told that Hispanic Latinos are Catholic, so don't touch them because they're Catholic. And yet all the people in this room were Methodist pastors and lay leaders. And we know in our culture that, yes, we can be culturally Catholic and Methodist or Baptist or evangelical, that just because we're culturally Catholic does not mean we can't be full-blown Methodist. And so we need to stop that lie, to stop saying that we are not allowed in because we have a Catholic background. So we talked about how we are the ones who need to stop that message, and how many Hispanics are not even churched at all these days. Talked about immigration. We talked about all kinds of things. We know just even this past week how the inclusive journey we've been on regarding LGBTQAI people who are beloved and working in our church. We are still on the front line of that that journey to include. We haven't solved our problems. We haven't embraced fully. So I hope to serve as one of the bishops who also can look to the edge. Yesterday I met with a friend who's been a longtime friend, and she said, don't forget us small people. And I think it's the tendency when you get into a seat of power to forget who is out there. And it's my commitment to be on the ground as much as I can so that I can remember to help us be part of the church that is a wide table, a big circle. Lastly, I just want to say when my mom died, my mom was a really creative soul, and she was kind of dramatic, and she was even dramatic as she was dying, and she couldn't, she had lost a lot of her memory, but she had this moment with God where right before she died, where she was describing what she was seeing, a vision, and she was seeing this table, and she was describing this banquet table that was so large and so big. And she says, those huge old trees in Washington, she grew up in Bremerton, Washington, those big old pine trees, the centerpiece to this table was one of those pine trees, and it was small compared to how big the table was. And she went on and on about the setting of the table and the kind of gemstones that were used and the people, masses of people around the table. She was describing heaven. And it's my hope that in this time, we can work towards creating heaven on earth again. It's not like we haven't done it before, but we need to continue to work towards having heaven on earth. And my friends, that means including everyone at the table. People we love, people we understand, people we don't understand, people we've never met before. The table is wide. And as Methodists, we can lift up that voice and be proud of that voice, of the wideness of God's mercy and God's grace. I look forward to this time and look forward to talking with you all more.
Bishop Carlo Rapanut.
Good morning, friends. I want to start out by, my name is Carlo Rapanut. Filipino immigrant. I was born in a city called Baguio in northern Philippines, which is part of the unceded, ancestral, yet colonized land of the Kankanai and Ibaloy tribes. My wife, Raddy, and I now make our home, at least until the end of the year, in Eagle River, Alaska, which is home of the Dena'ina Elnena people. And beginning January 1st, I will be serving in Phoenix and the Desert Southwest Conference in the land of the Odham, Jued, Akimel Odham, and Hohokam people. And I want to honor and give thanks to these indigenous people who have welcomed us as I would say long-term visitors to their land. Part of my journey is I am a child of migrants. We have a long history of migration as a family. My grandfather Aguinaldo and my grandmother Maura left the family town, the family home, to a land where they could start their own family and live among strangers who eventually became friends. It was the same story for my father, Jose, and my mother, Teofina, who again left the home, left the town where everything was comfortable and everything was familiar, to live in a land where they were welcomed, included, and eventually belonged. In 2008, my family and I and Caleb, our then 4-year-old, got on an airplane and went to be missionaries to the United States, to the Alaska Conference, where we have been serving since. We served a church, the United Methodist Church of Chugiak, for 6 years, and then I served as conference superintendent for Alaska, and then as assistant to the bishop to the area. My lineage, my family has always been on the journey and have benefited and have been welcomed included, and eventually felt a sense of belonging. Friends, it is my firm belief that we serve a migrant God who is always moving, always on the journey, and invites us to move and walk and grow. If you remember when when David in the Old Testament had this proposal, proposal to God to build a permanent residence, a temple for God, and God says, "No, I will not be. I will not be tied down. My presence will not be tied down to a place. I am a mobile God." And so, for the United Methodist Church, I see a church that is constantly being transformed as a tangible embodiment, as my hermana Dottie said, as a tangible embodiment of heaven here on earth, as God's kingdom here on earth. And I see a church that continually seeks and discovers its relevance in the world today. I see a church that employs grace in the parting and that would heal from the sorting that is happening right now. I see a church that works to rebuild and recover trust and respect through authentic, life-giving, and life-affirming relationships. I see a church that confesses and repents of its sin of exclusion and harm of our LGBTQIA+ siblings, and a church that moves forward in ways that foster genuine welcome, inclusion, and belonging. I see a church that confesses and repents from its sin of racism and moves forward in ways of healing and repentance that do not repeat the sins of the past and gets rid of vestiges of racism and white supremacy in its systems, in all of its ranks. I see a church that confesses and repents of its active and still present role in the sin of colonization of indigenous peoples in the United States and of peoples in parts of the world like the Philippines and Africa, and moves towards decolonized ways of being that includes repentance, reparations, and right relationships. I see a church that truly welcomes all people and where everyone feels that they belong, not as assimilated individuals to a dominant way of being, but bringing their full, unique selves to the ever-expanding table. My metaphor for this is the airport. As a superintendent, I used to travel a lot in Alaska. 2/3 of my churches I couldn't get to by the road system. So I don't think inclusion is the final destination. For that means that there is someone who is an insider or in a dominant position, including an outsider. I think belonging is the goal, is the final destination. And inclusion is the airplane that gets us there. In our Western jurisdiction class, the three of us, Bishop Cedrick, Bishop Dottie, and myself, represent historically and still discriminated and excluded people. Latinx, Latina woman, Filipino immigrant ordained in a central conference, Black gay man. Our 2022 class of new bishops, all 13 of us, many celebrated many firsts: the first Native American, the first Filipino American, the first openly gay Black man, the first Hispanic Latino in the Northeast, the first Black woman in the South Central, 7 women, 8 people of color. Now, my friends, inclusion is electing us to be bishops. Now, belonging means allowing each of us, each one of us, and people like us in all levels of the church to lead from our authentic selves without expectation to assimilate and conform to the dominant culture. I believe that we have gifts and graces to offer. And the question is, will you create space in your hearts for us to lead from who we are, even if it is uncomfortable, seemingly odd and different from what you are used to, trusting that God is continuing to make all things new. Friends, I see a church that is diverse in its leadership, its systems, and its decision-making processes. I see a church that is unafraid to restructure and allow itself to be continually transformed for the sake of its gospel witness. I see a church that moves forward from the pandemic, discovering new ways of being church and nurturing disciples. I see a church with diverse expressions of worship and discipleship and social justice that is rooted in our common Wesleyan heritage. And I see a church whose local expressions are well embedded in the life and needs of their communities. And for myself, I see myself leading the area where I have been sent to serve as a model for the rest of the denomination of what could be, leading the way while remaining a safe harbor of safety as the church struggles, strives, and stumbles its way towards being the tangible embodiment of God's kingdom here on earth. I commit myself to working towards this church that I see. Thank you, friends, for this time for me that you have given me to share with you today.
Thank you, Bishop. Next will be Bishop Bridgeforth.
Right, thank you all, and grace and peace to you. I am Bishop Cedrick Bridgeforth, and I'm still getting used to saying that. I am grateful to UMARC for this invitation to participate today and to share. I think it's important for you to know that, first off, my life verse, the information that comes to me at the beginning of every day comes from Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord and no one else. It reminds me of who I am, what I'm called to be and to do in the world. And whenever I get off center, I come back to it. I think it's also important for you to know that though 14 days or 18 years ago, it all feels about the same right now. When I was elected, I came to that office and that moment knowing that I was born and raised in rural North Alabama and spent the better part of my early years on a farm in that part of the country, and have spent the better part of my latter years in the heart of Southern California. And now with this election, moved to yet another area. I'm grateful for us to have some time to talk about an inclusive United Methodism. And for me, it centers on being relevant, merciful, and unafraid. And I do believe for us to move forward that we do have to be relevant, merciful, and unafraid as we come together and take seriously this opportunity that we have to put our energy and effort into addressing or contributing to the eradication of some major issues and concerns that we are facing. We can spend our time talking about disaffiliation because it's the topic of the day, yes, and there are some procedures that we need to go through, but there's still other energy that we have. There are other concerns that are facing us every single day. If we can think about houselessness or affordable housing and sustainable or supportive housing in the various places where we live, where we work, and where we serve, I think it'd be important for us to put some energy into mental health, emotional wellness, and trauma responses as we deal with isolation, loneliness, and fatigue, not just for our clergy, but for those in the communities where we serve. How about climate change or weather realities, depending on your bend there, where we come together and talk about what it means as a church, as people of faith, to lessen our carbon footprint and emissions in the US and around the world, that we promote sustainable energy sources and offer our properties as assets in the fight to slow the devastation of this planet. Now, I don't have to agree on every theological point that exists to affect change in the world. And if we want to have our own way and wield power and authority that's not ours to wield, fine. But if we want to relegate ourselves to irrelevance, then let's keep discussing who's in and who's out. Let's keep having battles that bruise each other and cause those on the outside to never consider a call to ministry or response to Christ because of the example of the Christian community that we exhibit. I mean, we still have racism, anti-Blackness, immigration, migration, the value of work and workers, voter suppression, and a host of other issues that we could tackle locally and globally, calling for us, waiting for us. Now, we can work on big problems together. We can work on policies that keep us together, but we have to focus on what it means to be relevant, merciful, and unafraid. In the Western jurisdiction, we have our safe harbor policies throughout our area. I believe those can be the way of the new United Methodist Church, that we make it the policy of the land and around for our denomination, that we use things like our mid-quadrennial training for our boards of ministry as a time to discuss the next practices and learn from each other, that we bring candidates who may need or want a new home so that they can find them. Let's be open and connectional in those ways. I don't believe a person should have to feel they don't belong because most of the people in their particular area hold differing views. If someone is called and needs a place to serve, without regard for their theological leaning, if it's Wesleyan, let's get those persons to an area where their gifts and graces can flourish. Then we can work together to articulate our inclusive theology so that no future generation has to continue these battles that we have fought and do not seem to know how to win or end. So yes, we work on big problems together. We work on policies that keep us together, and we work on mercy-focused behaviors. We do that together so that we are relevant, merciful, and unafraid. We name our fears of separation, splintering, or splitting alongside our fears of failure, of conflict, and irrelevance. We name our fear of losing power and having to include those that we may have discounted. We name our fear of the changes that have already happened that we continue to pretend are not real. But we can move forward together, challenging every local church to have somebody in it pursuing a call to ministry. And I don't just mean ordained ministry, that we have real discussions about the security of appointments and lifetime prerogatives of bishops. It's time to revise those policies and create alternatives that do not harm those individuals and communities that those policies were put in place to protect. And we also talk openly about student debt incurred to pursue a Master of Divinity degree that all of us say did not prepare us for ministry. We elevate course of study and licensed ministry, celebrate certified lay ministries, and provide clear pathways for every person to serve and not have to automatically go through the committee on ministry just because they feel called to serve meals to the homeless or visit those in nearby encampments. Relevance comes when we go where young people gather. We look, we listen, and we learn. And we change our language about we want young people and families when what we really mean is that we don't want to die the miserable death that appears to be imminent, especially when we do not have the will or the intention to allow young people to truly be young people in our presence. In any area or conference that is not actively discussing what church can be in a context that is not dominated by whiteness is too far behind the 8 ball and perpetuating a problem that keeps more people out than it will ever bring in. Beloved, we must have a vision with measurable goals that we set in pursuit of that vision. We must also be prayerful about our behaviors. because we can change all the policies and structures every time we meet. But if we do not change our behaviors, nothing will really change for the better. So we work on big problems together. We work on policies that keep us together. We work on mercy-focused behaviors together so that we are relevant, merciful, and unafraid, remembering the words of the prophet Isaiah that said, "Do not fear, because I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will surely help you. I will hold you with my righteous, strong hand." I am grateful we're engaged in this way today, and my hope and my prayer as we continue to engage, not just with those with whom we agree, but with those who are called and committed to being relevant, merciful, and unafraid. Thank you.